This is my ranking of games like Slay the Spire that I've played, based purely on my personal experience. Each one is placed from masterpiece down to trash, depending on how strong the deck building feels, how much strategy goes into each run, and how well the game keeps things fresh with its roguelike systems. Let's get straight into the list. Across the Obelisk puts me in control of a full party instead of a single character, and that immediately changes how I think about every turn. I'm not just building one deck, I'm managing 4 at the same time, trying to create synergy between roles like tank, support, and damage. I liked how abilities can interact in clever ways, especially when a setup leads into a strong combo turn. The map choices and events also add variety, giving runs a sense of direction instead of just moving forward blindly. At the same time, the amount of systems can feel heavy, especially early on, and status effects later can stack in ways that slow things down. Even with that, I kept finding reasons to come back and experiment more. It settles into the great tier. Balatro looks simple at first, but it quickly turns into something much deeper as I keep playing. I'm building around poker hands, but it never feels like actual poker because of how much I can change the rules. Jokers, tarot cards, and other upgrades completely reshape how my deck works, letting me stack multipliers in ways that can get out of control. I really like how every decision matters, from choosing which cards to keep to deciding when to take risks for a bigger score. Runs move fast, but there's always something to think about, which keeps it engaging the whole time. It also keeps things fresh by unlocking more options instead of just making things easier. I kept chasing bigger and bigger numbers without getting bored. This easily earns a spot in the masterpiece tier. Beneath Oresa feels more action-focused than most deck builders I've played, mainly because positioning actually matters during combat. I'm not just playing cards, I'm also thinking about where enemies are standing and how to move them around for better setups. That adds a layer I don't usually see in this genre. I also like how choosing a companion changes the run, since they bring extra abilities that can evolve over time if I invest in them. The factions play very differently too, which kept things fresh across runs. At times, the screen can get a bit messy with effects and animations, and it's not always clear what triggered what. Even with that, the combat flow stays satisfying, especially when chaining attacks together. This one ends up sitting in the great tier. Chrono Ark mixes deck building with a full party system, and that makes every run feel more tactical than usual. I'm not just thinking about cards, I'm planning around team synergy, energy use, and how abilities connect across characters. Each companion brings something different, so changing the lineup can completely shift how a run plays. I also like how the game slowly reveals more options over time, which keeps each attempt feeling fresh instead of repetitive. The fights can get intense, especially when enemies force me to rethink my usual approach. It does take time to understand everything, and early runs can feel a bit overwhelming because of how many systems are in play. Still, once things start to click, the depth really stands out. This one earns its place in the excellent tier. Cobalt Core mixes card-based combat with ship positioning, and that twist keeps every fight engaging in a different way. I'm not just playing attack and defense cards, I'm also moving my ship left and right to line up shots or avoid incoming damage. That small change adds a lot of strategy without making things complicated. I also like how each crew member changes the kind of cards I get, which makes every run feel different depending on the team I pick. The mid-row mechanics with drones and missiles add even more layers, especially when they help block attacks or set up damage. On top of that, the writing and characters bring a bit of personality that makes runs more memorable. It all comes together in a really clean system. This one finds its place in the excellent tier. Howl blends grid-based combat with card systems, but it didn't fully come together in a satisfying way for me. I like the idea of moving around a battlefield while using cards, and there are moments where positioning and planning feel meaningful. The dark atmosphere and story also stand out, with a strong focus on grief that gives the journey some weight. But the overall experience feels uneven, especially with how often I had to repeat the same encounters, which slowed things down. The lack of clear direction early on also made it harder to get into, and it took time before things started to make sense. There are good ideas here, but they don't always connect in a smooth way. This one ends up landing in the mediocre tier. Decktamer builds its whole idea around capturing monsters as cards, and that part caught my attention early on. I'm managing a team where each creature has health, speed, and different attacks, and losing one permanently adds tension to every fight. I like the risk of deciding when to switch or push forward because a single mistake can cost a strong unit. The art and sound design also stand out more than I expected, and they carry a lot of the experience. But the difficulty quickly becomes frustrating instead of rewarding, and runs can fall apart without giving me much room to recover. It often feels unbalanced, where progress depends more on luck than smart decisions. Even though the core idea is interesting, the execution holds it back. This one drops straight into the trash tier. Die in the Dungeon flips the usual idea by letting me play as the monster instead of the hero, and that made it stand out right away. I'm moving through the dungeon, fighting groups of heroes, and using different abilities to survive each encounter. I like how each monster has its own playstyle, which adds some variety between runs. The core loop is simple and easy to follow, especially with how stats and dice rolls decide combat outcomes. But the balance can feel inconsistent, where some fights are much harder than they should be, while others feel too easy. The scenarios also don't always match the pacing, which can make runs feel a bit off. Even with that, it still has enough interesting ideas to keep me playing for a while. This one settles into the good tier. Fights in tight spaces focuses heavily on positioning and planning, and that's what kept me engaged through most runs. I'm placed in small grid arenas where every move matters, whether I'm lining up attacks, pushing enemies into each other, or setting up defense for the next turn. I really like how I can see enemy actions beforehand, which lets me think ahead and create smart plays instead of reacting blindly. Building my set of cards over time also changes how I approach each fight, especially when certain combos start to come together. The minimalist style works well, even if the replay moments don't always feel as smooth as they should. Still, the tactical side carries the experience, and I kept experimenting with different approaches. This one earns its place in the excellent tier. Griftlands stands out because it splits everything between combat and negotiation, and I had to approach both in very different ways. I'm not just fighting enemies, I'm also talking my way through situations using a separate set of cards, which adds a lot of variety to each run. The choices I make with characters and factions actually matter, since relationships can help or hurt me later on in unexpected ways. I also like how each campaign tells its own story, which gives runs a stronger sense of purpose beyond just clearing encounters. Building around different strategies kept things interesting, especially when adapting to what I get during a run. It can feel overwhelming at times, with so many effects and decisions happening at once, but the depth makes it worth learning. This one finds its place in the excellent tier. Inscryption feels simple at first, but it keeps changing in ways I didn't expect as I kept playing. I'm placing creature cards, managing sacrifices, and trying to tip the scale in my favor. But the game keeps adding new ideas that shift how everything works. I really like how it mixes in puzzle elements outside of the card battles, which adds another layer to the experience. The atmosphere also stands out, with a dark setting that keeps things tense without relying on cheap tricks. What really makes it special is how it keeps reinventing itself while still feeling connected at its core. Just when I get used to one system, something new changes the flow again. It stayed interesting the whole way through. This one rises all the way into the masterpiece tier. Lonestar places me in control of a bounty hunter ship, and most of the strategy comes from how I build around units, weight limits, and energy use. I'm managing different systems at once, trying to balance attack and support while keeping my setup efficient. I like how each ship changes the way I play, especially with abilities like shielding or swapping weapons mid-battle. There's also a good amount of variety with pilots, talents, and upgrades, which keeps runs from feeling too similar. The art style and music give it a relaxed tone that fits well with the gameplay loop. Since it's still in early access, some parts feel a bit limited, especially with the number of ships available right now. Even so, I kept experimenting with different builds and setups. This one lands in the good tier. Monster trained 2 builds on everything I liked before and adds even more ways to experiment during runs. I'm managing units across different floors, setting up defenses, and timing my actions carefully to handle incoming waves. What keeps it exciting is how many choices I get, from combining factions to building around different strategies that can completely change how a run plays out. The new systems like equipment and room effects add even more depth without making things confusing. I really enjoy how runs can spiral into powerful setups when everything lines up, but it still pushes back with tough enemies that force me to adapt. There's always something new to try, and it never feels repetitive. This one rises straight into the masterpiece tier. Shogun Showdown keeps things simple on the surface, but the depth shows up once I start planning my moves. I'm lining up attacks, movement, and abilities in advance, knowing that enemies will respond right after, which makes every decision matter. The tile system works really well, especially when I start upgrading them and building small combos that can turn a fight around. I also like how different abilities can be used in creative ways, even basic ones becoming useful with the right upgrades. The difficulty is high, and I had runs where my setup just didn't match what the game threw at me. Still, most of the challenge feels fair and pushed me to think more carefully. The clean style and smooth flow make it easy to keep going for another run. This one earns its place in the excellent tier. SpellRogue replaces cards with dice, and that change gives it a different kind of rhythm during runs. I'm still planning builds and thinking ahead, but a lot depends on what numbers I roll each turn. That randomness can be exciting when things line up, especially when I get the rolls I need for a strong combo. At the same time, it can also feel frustrating when a run falls apart because the dice don't cooperate. I do like the board game style presentation with its clean visuals and simple layout that make everything easy to follow. The overall structure feels familiar, moving through encounters, shops, and events, but it doesn't always feel as rewarding over time. I kept playing to see different outcomes, even with the slower progression. This one settles into the great tier. StarVaders mixes grid movement with card-based actions, and I liked how positioning plays a big role in every fight. I'm constantly thinking about where enemies are moving and how to place myself to deal damage while avoiding pressure. The different mechs also change things a lot, with each one having its own mechanics that can make runs feel very different. There's some creativity in how it all comes together, especially when builds start to click. But at the same time, it didn't fully hold my attention across multiple runs. The shorter structure and smaller setups sometimes made progress feel limited, and I didn't always feel rewarded for experimenting. Even though the core idea is interesting, it didn't stick with me in the long run. This one ends up in the mediocre tier. Vault of the Void leans heavily into deep card mechanics, and I had to really think through every decision I made during a run. I'm managing a limited deck, choosing which cards to keep, remove, or upgrade, and even deciding when to purge cards mid-fight for extra energy. That system alone adds a layer I don't usually see, and it changes how I approach each turn. I also like how different builds like bleed or shock setups play in completely different ways once they start working. At the same time, it can feel overwhelming, especially early on when a lot of mechanics are thrown at me quickly. It took a few runs before things started to make sense. Once it clicks though, the depth really stands out. This one earns a place in the excellent tier. Wildfrost builds its combat around timing, and that's what made it stand out during my runs. I'm watching countdown timers on both sides, trying to plan moves so my attacks land at the right moment while avoiding incoming damage. That system adds a nice layer of strategy, especially when managing companions and keeping my main leader alive at all costs. I also like the charm in its presentation, with bright visuals and simple designs that make everything easy to read. Runs are quick, which made it easy to jump back in after a loss. At the same time, the difficulty can feel uneven, with some runs ending early without much room to recover. Even with that frustration, I kept going back for another attempt. This one finds its place in the great tier. That's my ranking. Some runs kept me thinking every turn, while others just didn't hold up over time. If you've played any of these, I'd be interested to know which ones you'd move up or down on your own list. Thanks for watching.